Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what happens is that, eh, if the effect is the same, so when people say in the Health Canada or the government of Canada is banning products, it's no, they're not passing the law saying um, these products are legal, although I'll have to back up and explain later. Well, yes, they did do that. So, but that's old news. That's 2004. But what they're doing is they're bringing in what's called the self-care framework, and there's a whole bunch of little tentacles to this framework. And collectively, they're going to put us in a situation where they might as well be banning our products, where, I sincerely believe we're going to end up in a situation where we lose most of our products, especially the effective multi-ingredient ones, and the ones that our healthcare practitioners rely on to treat us. So by way of example, so they're going to move us into this self-care framework where they're harmonizing how we regulate natural health products with chemical over-the-counter drugs. And what they've made clear to us is, well, once we've got this new set of regulations, once we're fully harmonized, you cannot, under this self-care framework, get a license for something that truly isn't over-the-counter. So like, well, let's say you want a pain reliever and you go to the drugstore and you see aspirin sitting on the shelf, and next to it you see white willow bark. Now, for your viewers that don't know, is aspirin comes, you can see it comes from white willow bark. So all Bayer did was, white willow bark's been used for centuries as a pain reliever, and it works really effective without the gastrointestinal bleeding of aspirin. And they isolated, the molecule that is most responsible. There are other things in white willow bark that help with pain relief, but most responsible. And then they tweaked that molecule slightly, so now it's a synthetic chemical. It's not a naturally occurring one. It still works for pain relief, but being that it's not all, tied up with other ingredients as white willow bark is, it has the side effect of gastrointestinal bleeding that actually causes deaths every year in Canada. So it's kind of interesting we could use white willow bark for the same purposes, including, the baby aspirin purpose of slight blood thinning that it's widely used for, with white willow bark without the problem. In fact, the British government did a big study on that and reached that conclusion, and the rest of the world, including Britain, made no changes. So, but, I'm just back to this as over the counter. So those two products would be sitting there over the counter. Well, right now they're regulated quite differently. And in very clever marketing, Health Canada said, well, that's not fair to the consumer. Because here ASA has very strict chemical drug regulations, and white willow bark has much less stringent regulations, and the consumer can't know that. They're both on the shelf beside each other. They're both for pain relief. We should subject white willow bark to the same strict regulations as aspirin in an effort to protect the consumer and give the consumer confidence. That's the marketing. I can explain later why that's just nonsense. But it's for over-the-counter drugs, not anything you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner. So Health Canada is telling us, once we're fully implemented in the self-care framework, we are not going to be licensing products under this framework that, you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner for. Well, the only other drug pathway that you can get a license under is what's called the new drug approval process, and no natural products ever gotten through that process, and none ever will. So in effect, we're going to lose any product that is for any condition that you would not just over-the-counter use. So you'll still be able to get things like, oh, I have a rash on my wrist, I want a skin cream for that. But things for serious conditions or, any moderate condition even, it's going to disappear. So even that alone is going to be a huge problem. But there's a whole bunch of other things. But I think before I get into that, I think I should make clear, this is kind of part of a two-phase, process of Health Canada. I started in this industry in 1994, I'm a lawyer. So when I say started in the industry, my law practice became involved in the regulation of natural health products. In 1994, I was actually hired to be Health Canada's counsel. A herbalist was suing Health Canada for stealing his herbs at the border, and I was hired to defend Health Canada in that. And then after that, I started my own firm, and actually that herbalist was charged with practicing medicine without a license in another effort to get him to stop, and hired me. And then ever since then, roughly half of my practice for 30 years has been involved in the regulation of natural health products. So what happened is we were unregulated before, just like the United States is unregulated. So you didn't have to apply to Health Canada for permission. You weren't really treated like a chemical drug. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, both in Canada and the US, the regulatory bodies started attacking natural health products and saying you had to comply with these chemical drug regulations, which were never intended to apply to things in our food supply. And there were citizen rebellions in both countries. But what's really shocking is both countries took the opposite approach. So in the United States, the citizen rebellion was so large that Congress actually held hearings and looked into how should we regulate natural health products. And at the end of that, they said, these products are so safe that we should actually deem them by law to be safe. So they passed in 1994 the Dietary Health and Education Act of 1994, where what we call natural health products are classed as foods, which makes perfect sense because most of the ingredients are in our food supply. I mean, just because you dry parsley and put it in a capsule, the same parsley you would buy for your salad, it doesn't become dangerous just because you put it in a capsule. It's the same product. So they deem them to be foods by law. By law, there's actually a legal presumption they're deemed to be safe. Yeah. So their federal or Food and Drug Administration can't pretend they're dangerous like Health Canada does here. They're deemed by law to be safe. And their regulatory body can't take a natural product off the market by law unless they have significant evidence that there's actually a risk. I mean, the odd product out there can present a risk, and we're not worried about adulteration, anything like that. Like everyone's legislation protects against that. And we're not worried about clean premises, and that's a separate issue that everyone agrees on and is covered separately. Well, Canada, we have our citizen rebellion. And it was so large that actually Parliament looked into it. So the Minister of Health at the time, Alan Rock, this is in 2008, there's a big citizen rebellion going on, and the government was going to bring in cost recovery. And what cost recovery is that the chemical drug companies pay fees to get a license to sell. They pay fees to be able to manufacture in a building, even to label or package in a building. They have to pay fees. This is what pays Health Canada's salaries. There's a bit of a conflict of interest because 3/4 of Health Canada's salaries come from the chemical drug companies. And we shouldn't be structured that way because it does create a conflict of interest. But Health Canada was going to oppose these fees back in 1998 on the natural health product industry. And so we actually started a lawsuit. I mean, I didn't personally, but the natural health community did. And the day before the lawsuit was set to be heard, the government backed down. So Health Minister Alan Rock says, okay, we've heard Canadians are unhappy about this. And he asked the Standing Committee of Health, will you look into, and not just, a cursory look, take a deep dive and look into how should we regulate these products? And so the Standing Committee of Health at that time, and this is, 98, 99, had the broadest consultations of any standing committee in Parliament in our history. It was wide and far. And they came to they came out with a bunch of recommendations, but the two themes that no one could deny were you can't regulate these like chemical drugs. Like, it's apples and oranges. It's so completely inappropriate. And don't pretend they're unsafe, because they're not. And also, Canadians want increased access. So we wanted increased access. Now, will Health Canada, in trying to regulate these like chemical drugs, have always, for all of my 30 years of practice, there's danger, there's danger, there's danger. And right now they're saying, well, there's danger. We need to do this to protect you, the Canadian citizen, from the harm of these products.